She raised her glass and shattered my life instead. The sound echoed through the auditorium, sharp as crystal breaking. I was 64, standing among proud parents, my hands trembling with pride that curdled into disbelief. My daughter, Emily, stood on stage in her graduation gown, sunlight spilling over her like blessing and spotlight at once. The microphone hummed faintly, and I remember thinking how beautiful she looked, how every struggle I endured had led to this day. Then her voice cut through the air, smooth and deliberate. "I'd like to thank the woman who taught me what failure looks like." A hush followed. Then laughter, scattered at first, then rippling, cruel and knowing. My name was not said, but every eye turned to me. I stood frozen, smile plastered, heart clawing at my ribs. The applause that followed felt like thunder over a grave. That morning, I had woken early, buttered toast in the kitchen, sunlight falling across the counter. The scent of lilies drifted from a vase Emily had placed there 2 days before. "For luck," she'd said, brushing my shoulder. The way she said it then still haunts me now. It wasn't affection, it was farewell. I can still feel the warmth of that moment fading, as though the house itself knew it was the last time we'd laugh as mother and daughter. When the ceremony ended, I stood by the exit doors, waiting for her. People passed, murmuring. Some offered polite smiles. Others avoided me entirely. The sound of the microphone cutting out replayed in my head like an unfinished sentence. I looked up at the banners, "Congratulations, Class of the Year," and thought of all the nights I stayed awake paying for her tuition, praying for her peace. She never came to me. She left with her friends, laughter trailing behind her like perfume gone sour. The champagne glass I held slipped from my hand, hitting the floor with a dull crack. It didn't shatter completely. It just split down the middle, like something waiting to break further. Outside, the sun burned bright against the school's stone facade. My reflection in the glass door stared back, a woman still holding on to a moment that no longer existed. I tried to steady my breathing, but the air carried echoes of laughter. It was the sound of a crowd celebrating a secret they didn't understand. One of the teachers, a kind man named Daniel, approached quietly. "Mrs. Harper," he said, voice low. "She's young. Maybe she didn't mean it that way." "She meant it exactly that way," I whispered. He looked away. "You should go home before the press photos start." The idea of home felt foreign. The walls, the kitchen, the smell of toast, all of it now belonged to a memory that had betrayed me. I walked to the car park, the sound of my heels on the pavement sharp and hollow. A woman's voice from behind me said softly, "You're stronger than that." I turned, but no one was there. Maybe it was my mind, trying to soothe what couldn't be soothed. At the gate, I glanced back once. Emily was posing for photos, her arm draped over her father's shoulders. My ex-husband caught my eye for half a second. His smile faltered. He knew the performance we were all living through. I drove home in silence. Every mile replayed her words. "The woman who taught me what failure looks like." The sentence built its own rhythm, a heartbeat of humiliation. When I reached the house, the lilies had begun to droop. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast, an omen I had missed. I touched one of the petals. It crumbled at my fingertips. That night, I sat by the mirror in my bedroom. The reflection was cruelly honest. Red eyes, trembling hands, a face I no longer recognized. The silence pressed heavy, only broken by the faint ringing in my ears. Somewhere in that ringing, I heard her laugh again. "I gave her everything," I said aloud, though no one was listening. "And she gave me this." Outside, a car door slammed. A distant sound carried through the walls. I wondered if she'd come home, but the house stayed quiet. I reached for my phone, then stopped. What would I even say? Why? How could you? Did it make you feel better? No, I told myself, not tonight. Tonight, I would remember what it felt like before the break. Before her voice turned into a weapon, I poured myself a glass of water, watched it catch the lamplight, fractured and trembling like everything inside me. They clapped while my heart split open. And in that silence, I swore I would find out why. By morning, the lilies had turned brown. Their wilted petals clung to the vase like something refusing to let go, even after death. The house was still, carrying the faint trace of yesterday's perfume and burnt toast. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. It had been less than 24 hours since Emily's speech, yet the world had shifted into a colder orbit. Sunday came, and I went to church out of habit more than faith. The air outside smelled of rain and old wood. I walked up the path lined with rose bushes that someone had trimmed too close. Even beauty felt punished here. Inside, the pews gleamed under the morning light, the scent of lilies thick and spoiled. The same flowers that once comforted me now made me sick. When I stepped into my usual row, whispers rolled from behind like distant thunder. "That's her. The one from the graduation." Their words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. Shame has a way of amplifying every sound. I kept my head down, pretending to adjust my coat. The pastor's gaze met mine for half a second before sliding away. His sermon began, about forgiveness of all things. The choir started, soft and uncertain. I caught sight of Sarah, a woman from the alto section, someone I'd once called friend. She hesitated before offering me a nod, small, almost apologetic. I returned it. That was our silent pact, pity exchanged in place of friendship. After service, people gathered outside for coffee. The smell of rain mixed with the lilies on the altar, a sweet rot that clung to everything. No one asked how I was. No one mentioned Emily. They just smiled tightly, as if decency were an obligation they couldn't afford to drop. One woman pressed her lips together and said, "Children can be cruel, dear," then turned to refill her cup. Sarah approached later, clutching a stack of choir sheets. "You shouldn't let them get to you," she whispered. "They'll move on." "Will they?" I asked. She hesitated. "Eventually." She meant never. Her attempt at kindness cracked something inside me. I wanted to scream, to demand why none of them defended me, why silence had become their moral shield. Instead, I said, "The lilies were beautiful once." "They still are," she murmured, though her eyes said otherwise. Back home, I found a folded note slipped under my front door, a parish notice for the next Sunday service. My name wasn't on the volunteer list for the choir anymore. The decision had been made quietly, efficiently, like trimming a dying branch. There was a handwritten line at the bottom. "We thought you might need rest," signed by the pastor. His penmanship was elegant. His cowardice wasn't. I placed the notice on the counter beside the lilies. The smell hit stronger now, sweetness turned sour. I picked up the vase and carried it to the back door. The water sloshed against the glass. Outside, the grass glistened under morning dew. I poured the vase out slowly, watching brown petals scatter across the wet ground. Each petal felt like a word unsaid, accusations, explanations, apologies that would never come. I whispered, "What did I do to deserve this?" The wind took my voice before it could echo back. Inside, the house felt emptier than before. The pew hymn still hummed in my mind, that final chord lingering just long enough to ache. I walked to the hallway mirror and caught my reflection. Tired, older, smaller. The smell of lilies still clung to my clothes, even after washing my hands. Some sense refused to leave. I sat down, folded the notice in half, then again until it was a small square. I tucked it inside the drawer with old church bulletins and donation receipts. Proof, I thought. Proof that goodness has an expiration date. When night came, I lit a candle and prayed without words. My faith had grown quiet, like a wounded thing. Somewhere between the flickering shadows, I made a vow, not of vengeance, but of clarity. I would find out what broke her heart enough to make her break mine in front of everyone. The candle's flame tilted, struggling against the draft. I whispered, "Stay alive." Even God felt like he'd turned away. Her handwriting looked older than she was. The loops were jagged, uneven, like guilt trying to disguise itself as apology. I found the letter on the kitchen counter, resting between unpaid bills and a coffee cup with a lipstick mark that wasn't mine. The sunlight from the window struck the paper just enough to show where her pen had pressed too hard, where hesitation turned into intent. The texture was rough beneath my fingers, as though the paper itself had absorbed the weight of what it carried. Inside, her words stumbled across the page. "I had no choice. You wouldn't understand. It's only temporary." My eyes caught a line further down, numbers written carefully, $1,420 and $3,600, both withdrawn from my account, both signed under my name, my birthday, the date on the 1st. She had planned this when I was too busy celebrating her future. I sat down. The chair creaked. Somewhere outside, a bird chirped like life had the audacity to continue. I stared at those numbers until they blurred. Lies have amounts now, I thought. They come with receipts. 2 hours later, I walked into the bank. The air was colder there, the kind of chill that lives in places where truth gets recorded. A young man at the counter recognized me. Daniel, one of the tellers who used to joke about how my daughter got her math skills from me. He hesitated when he saw the letter in my hand. "You might want to sit," he said softly. "There's something you should see." He led me to his screen. My name glowed across it in black letters, followed by account activity I'd never made. Transactions, withdrawals, transfers, each line like a cut. He clicked one entry and turned the monitor slightly my way. "This one happened on March 5th. Tuition payment to Eastboro College. It's signed under your authorization ID." He paused. "But the signature looks off." "Off how?" My voice cracked on the word. He didn't answer right away. He just printed the record, a reference ID marked 74B5, and slid it toward me. I traced the signature. It was mine, but it wasn't. The loops were slower, deliberate. Her attempt at mimicry had almost fooled the system. Almost. "She used my name," I whispered. Daniel's face softened. "You'll need to report it. There's a form, proof of forgery, but—" He stopped, searching for the right word. "It's your daughter, right?" I nodded. "Yes." "Then I'll handle this carefully," he said. "No one needs to know until you decide." He became the gatekeeper of my humiliation, holding the keys to the truth I wasn't ready to claim. I took the printed sheet, folded it once, then again, until it felt small enough to hide, but heavy enough to crush me. Outside, the afternoon heat pressed against the glass doors. The world moved on, cars passing, people laughing, the sound of a bus pulling away. None of them knew that my life had been signed away in neat pen strokes. At home, I placed the printout beside her letter. 2 pieces of paper, one handwritten, one official, both telling the same story. I had been betrayed not by strangers, but by the child I raised to trust in honesty. The paper edges scraped against my palm, their texture sharp, real. Motherhood turned into evidence, I thought. I opened the drawer where I kept old tax receipts and found the small brass key that opened my filing cabinet. It was cold, heavier than I remembered. I locked the papers inside, my hand trembling as the latch clicked. Proof had become my new prayer. When night fell, I sat by the kitchen window, watching the last stripe of light fade from the sky. I could almost hear her laughter in the house, echoes from when she was still innocent, still kind. The wind brushed against the curtain, soft, like a question I couldn't answer. How does a mother protect a child who becomes her own undoing? I leaned back in my chair and let the silence settle. Somewhere in that stillness, a vow began to form. Quiet, unspoken, but certain. I would find out why. I would uncover every lie, every secret, every hidden account. On the counter, her letter still lay open, the ink drying into permanence. Her signature sat where my trust once lived. My wedding ring appeared in a pawn shop window. It caught the afternoon light like it was still trying to be mine. I froze, staring through the glass, my reflection overlapping with the small golden band. The tag beneath it read, Item Reference 18A2. My name wasn't there, But hers was. I didn't need a receipt to know who had taken it. The way the light hit that ring felt cruel, like it was laughing at the memory of vows that once meant forever. Inside, the air smelled of metal and dust. A radio hummed in the background, playing something slow and distant. The man behind the counter looked up from his ledger, squinting. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. I pointed toward the display. "That ring, the one with the dent near the edge. How much?" He hesitated. "It's already sold pending pickup." "Can I see the paperwork?" My voice shook, but I forced it to sound steady. He frowned. "Only the seller's signature would be on that, ma'am." "Then let me see that." Something in my tone made him pause. He reached for a folder under the counter, thumbed through a stack of forms, and slid one toward me. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Emily Harper. My daughter's name, my blood, my betrayal, written in blue ink and indifference. The date on the receipt hit me next, 2 days before graduation. I did the math without meaning to. While I ironed her gown, she sold the symbol of my marriage. The witness, he must have seen the change in my face, spoke softly. "She cried, you know, said her mother owed her a future." Owed? The word cut through me like broken glass. He nodded. "That's what she said. I didn't understand it, but she looked desperate, told me it wasn't stealing if she deserved it." Deserved it. The words rang louder than the ticking clock above us. My throat burned. I reached for the glass case, touching the cold surface above the ring. The fluorescent light turned the gold pale, almost lifeless. "I can buy it back," I whispered. "I'm afraid not," he said. "Once it's logged, it can't leave until the hold clears." "How long?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. Each number felt like a sentence, time measured not in days, but in humiliation. I straightened, the edges of the room blurring. "Keep it safe," I told him. "That ring, it's not just gold." He nodded, quiet. "I'll do what I can." Outside, the sunlight was harsher than before. The reflection on the shop window showed me standing there, hands trembling, eyes empty. Behind my reflection, the ring gleamed faintly, its circle unbroken, mocking the illusion that something could still be whole. I walked home slowly. The city noise dulled into a hum, my thoughts louder than traffic. What kind of pain makes a daughter steal from her mother? What kind of guilt lets her justify it? Somewhere between grief and rage, I found clarity. This wasn't rebellion. It was retribution. She believed I'd failed her, and this was her proof. At home, I opened my jewelry box, empty spaces where things used to be. I remembered my wedding day, the smell of lilies, the way the light caught the ring when he slipped it onto my finger, promises whispered under soft music. I had worn it through every hardship, through storms, silence, and survival. To her, it was just metal to melt down for money. I lit a lamp, the kind of soft glow that hides more than it reveals. On my desk lay the pawn receipt, creased from how tightly I held it. I traced her name again, each letter carved deeper into my understanding. Entitlement, dressed as pain. That's what the witness had said. He was right. She didn't just want help. She wanted payback. I folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into an envelope marked Evidence. The word looked strange in my handwriting, like it belonged to someone colder, stronger. Maybe it did. Before bed, I looked once more at the empty space on my finger. It wasn't the gold I missed. It was what it represented. Faith, unity, memory, all traded for cash and self-pity. I whispered to the dark, "She doesn't know what she's done." The silence didn't answer. It never does. Only the faint hum of the streetlights outside, flickering like something tired of pretending to shine. She sold love for the price of pity. Her voice came through a stranger's number. It was evening, and the house was dark except for the light spilling from the hallway lamp. I almost didn't answer, but habit won over instinct. "Mom?" The word cracked on her tongue. I froze. I hadn't heard her voice since the pawn shop, since the day I saw what she'd done. Now it sounded smaller, almost childlike. "Please don't hang up," she said. I hesitated. The air hummed faintly, the kind of hum you notice only when your heartbeat slows to match it. "What do you want?" "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've made mistakes. I want to fix them." Something in her tone felt off, rehearsed, like an actress auditioning for mercy. I tried to find the girl I used to know in her words, but every sentence felt like it had been practiced in front of a mirror. "You sold my ring, Emily," I said quietly. "How do you fix that?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said quickly. "You left me no choice. You never trusted me." Her words were clipped, too clean. I'd known that voice since the day she learned to speak, and I knew when it was lying. I wanted to hang up, but part of me needed to hear what came next. She was calm, measured, not grief, performance. Then there was a faint click on the line. A second later, I heard my own voice echo back, distorted, hollow. "What are you doing?" I asked. "What do you mean?" she said, but there was a tremor now, a tiny fracture in her act. "You're recording this." "No, I—" "Stop lying." Silence. Then the call ended. The quiet that followed was unbearable. The lamp flickered, light bouncing off the phone screen as if the room itself was accusing me. My reflection on the dark glass looked foreign, a woman half lit, half shadow. I set the phone down and tried to steady my breathing. The world outside felt far away. It was less than an hour later when my phone buzzed again. Not a call this time, but a notification, a video link, no sender. I opened it before common sense could stop me. There I was, my voice, edited, spliced between fragments of Emily's call. It sounded like I was threatening her, like I was the abuser. Each pause had been rearranged, every sigh turned into guilt. "She's framing you for harassment." That voice came from the next call, Daniel, the school's disciplinary officer, the arbiter. He'd always spoken with quiet caution, but this time his tone carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "The clip's been shared in the student group," he said. "You should take precautions, maybe step back for now." So she gets to ruin me, and I just stay silent? My voice cracked under its own disbelief. "I'm advising calm," he said. "If you react publicly, it'll only fuel her version." I could almost hear the discomfort in his breathing, the kind that says, "I believe you, but I can't say it out loud." When the call ended, I sat in the dark again. I replayed her voice in my head, the tremble, the manipulation, the faint sniff she used to soften the lie. My mind raced through every version of motherhood I'd failed at, every decision that had led to this. A boundary began to form, brittle but real. I blocked her number, deleted every voicemail, every old text. Access limit, I thought. No more explanations, no more forgiveness to weaponize. If she wanted an audience, she could have the internet, but she couldn't have me. The night deepened. Outside, a car passed, its headlights sweeping through the window. I caught my reflection in the glass again, the faint shimmer of the phone beside me. I looked like someone erased mid-sentence. I whispered to the empty room, "She's rewriting my story." The hum of silence returned, louder now. Even the air felt thick with judgment. Somewhere out there, people were watching that clip, believing every twisted word. I imagined their faces, teachers, parents, strangers, forming opinions over something I hadn't said. By midnight, the damage had already spread. My email filled with questions, half accusations wrapped in concern. No one asked for proof. No one needed to. Once a lie finds rhythm, truth stumbles to catch up. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. The clip replayed automatically, looping her voice and mine until I could no longer tell which belonged to whom. By nightfall, I was the villain. 3 knocks sounded like a summons. I stood frozen in the hallway, the sound sharp against the quiet hum of the afternoon. Outside, the heat shimmered through the curtains, white light pressing against the glass. When I finally opened the door, I found Mr. Harris, the HOA president, standing stiffly on the porch, clipboard in hand, sweat glistening on his temple. His smile was small, professional, and already apologetic. "Afternoon," he said, voice thin as paper. "We've had a few concerns raised." He handed me a folded sheet stamped with the red word, "Notice." The heat on the porch felt heavier than the paper in my hand. I unfolded it slowly. Words jumped out: unpredictable behavior, verbal aggression, potential disturbance to neighbors. My stomach dropped. I could almost hear her voice written between the lines. "Who said this?" I asked. He shifted uncomfortably. "Anonymous reports mostly, but, one name you might recognize." His eyes darted to the house across the street. Emily's childhood friend, Claire, stood near the gate pretending to trim her hedge, watching, listening. "Your daughter's been worried," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "She mentioned you've been under stress since the ceremony." "Under stress?" I almost laughed. "That's one way to describe betrayal." He blinked, clipboard trembling slightly. "I'm just following procedure. You understand, right? The board has to take every concern seriously." "The board," I repeated. The word tasted bitter. "Tell the board they're welcome to my life if they think they can manage it better." He hesitated, pity creeping into his eyes. "You could file a written response, a formal notice. It'll go on record." For a moment, I said nothing. The sun beat down behind him, turning the air thick, the temperature climbing into something unbearable. I could feel sweat gathering on the back of my neck, the same way shame does, slow and sticky. "I'll file one," I said finally. "You'll have it by tomorrow." He nodded, almost relieved. "I'm sure this will all clear up soon." He turned to leave, but paused. "People talk, Margaret. Just keep calm, all right? It'll help." The door closed behind him with a dull thud. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Through the lace curtain, I saw him walk down the path, joining Claire at the gate. They spoke in low tones before parting ways. Their silhouettes looked conspiratorial against the afternoon glare. I leaned against the door and let out a shaky breath. The house felt smaller now, the walls closing in under invisible judgment. I picked up the flyer someone had shoved through the mail slot earlier that morning. Bold letters reading, "Community safety first. Look out for erratic neighbors." No names, but they didn't need one. Everyone knew who it was meant for. Lies had gained structure. They had stationery now. I walked to my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. The pen trembled between my fingers as I began to write my own notice. Calm, factual, deliberate. A record that said, "I see what you're doing. I won't stay quiet." "Formal notice, filed with Homeowners Association," I wrote neatly at the top. Beneath it, I listed dates, times, and the exact language used in the complaint. 2 sentences in particular burned my eyes: "loss of control observed on multiple occasions," and "potential emotional instability." I circled them, pressing the pen so hard it nearly tore the paper. Those weren't just words, they were weapons. The room felt hot, too hot. I pulled the curtain aside for air, but stopped halfway. Outside, 2 neighbors stood by the mailbox, glancing toward my house between whispers. When my shadow crossed the window, they looked away, pretending to check their phones. My pulse pounded in my ears. Later, as the sun dipped low, my gatekeeper neighbor, Mrs. Lane, the only one still kind enough to knock gently, came by with a bag of lemons from her tree. "Don't let them get to you," she said softly. "It's just talk. People believe what's easy, not what's true." "Emily told them I lost control," I said. Her eyes fell. "That's what they're saying? Then I'll give them something different to believe." That night, I filed the notice online. The confirmation email pinged back almost instantly, a sterile acknowledgement from the system. "Your submission has been received. Reference ID 203B." The words looked official, yet impersonal, like everything in my life had been reduced to entries on a ledger. When I closed the laptop, I sat still for a long time, letting the night air seep through the thin curtain. The sound of distant laughter carried from the street, but it wasn't kind. It was the kind that feeds on rumor. I whispered to the dark, "They don't want the truth. They want a villain." Somewhere beyond the glass, a porch light flickered. I could almost feel the weight of every gaze pressed against my walls. They nodded, as if I'd already confessed. Keys don't tremble, but mine did. It was small, silver, unremarkable, yet my hand shook as I placed it on the counter. The clerk at the bank, a young woman with tired eyes and steady hands, smiled politely. "You said it's for a safe deposit check, ma'am?" Her voice was calm, neutral, the kind that could belong to a nurse or a judge. I nodded, sliding the key forward. "Yes," I said softly. "Box reference 21C." The lock clicked open with an obedient sound, but something in the air shifted. Like the vault exhaled secrets it had been holding too long. The smell of old paper and cold metal filled the space, dry and sterile. I followed her into the narrow corridor lined with boxes, each one someone's private world sealed in metal. My footsteps echoed like quiet accusations. Inside the box, beneath a folded contract, was a folder labeled Harper & Harper Joint Account. I stared at the words, blinking once, twice. I had never opened a joint account. Not with anyone, not even her. My name was typed neatly beside hers. Same address, same date of birth. The ink looked legitimate. The signature, almost identical to mine. Almost. "Can I see the records for this?" I asked, voice tight. The clerk hesitated. "That's confidential unless you're—" "I am the name on that file," I said, louder this time. My trembling hand rested on the folder like proof of existence. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Give me a minute." She disappeared into the glass office beyond the vault. When she returned, she carried a printed ledger. Each page looked cleaner than my memory. Numbers lined up neatly. Deposits, withdrawals, dates. I traced one line, then another, my eyes stopping at 2 entries. $9,200 withdrawn in total, split across 2 dates. The most recent was just 3 weeks ago. "She's been using my name," I whispered. The clerk looked uneasy. "These withdrawals were signed by both account holders. We require verification through ID and signature." "I never signed anything." "I understand," she said, softer now, "but the records show otherwise." She turned the page and pointed to the authorization form. My signature was there. Perfect. Practiced. My name written by someone who had studied every loop and slant until forgery became fluency. Beneath it, her own name, Emily Harper. My throat closed. "Can I get copies?" I managed. "I'll need to verify that request with our compliance officer," she said. "It might take a day." "I'll wait." Something in my tone must have told her this wasn't a polite request. She left again, her footsteps fading into the hum of fluorescent lights. The metal walls seemed to close in, reflecting fragments of my reflection. Blurred, fractured, ghost-like. The vault was too quiet, the kind of silence that makes every breath sound guilty. When she came back, she placed 3 documents on the counter. "For your records," she said carefully. "And, if I may, there's a process for fraud reporting. You'll need to fill out a complaint form. I can print one." Her professionalism carried kindness beneath it, the kind that sees what protocol doesn't say. "Print it," I said. As I signed the new form, my hand steadied. The paper's grain pressed against my thumb, rough and dry. It felt real, solid, like survival had a texture. "Once this is submitted," she said, "the account will be frozen. We'll flag all related transactions for investigation." "Good," I said. "Let it stay frozen." Outside, the afternoon heat had softened. I sat on the concrete steps of the bank, papers in my lap, the folder balanced against my knees. I could still feel the ghost of her handwriting beneath mine. The perfect mimicry of love turned into theft. A text from the protector came minutes later. Daniel, the same one who had warned me before. You did the right thing. Now we make it official. Official. The word lingered. For weeks, I'd been painted as unstable, emotional, irrational. But ink didn't lie, not this time. Paper had power, and it had finally chosen a side. I watched people pass on the street, men in suits, mothers with strollers, students laughing. None of them knew that a quiet war was unfolding between bloodlines, not for inheritance, not for money, but for truth. And truth had just taken its first breath. I gathered the papers, slipped the key back into my purse, and walked toward the car. My hand was steady now. For the first time in months, I wasn't pleading. I was documenting every detail, every signature, every number. Behind me, the glass doors reflected a woman I barely recognized. Calm, composed, carrying evidence instead of grief. Paper began to fight back. They smiled like strangers rehearsing grief. The dining room felt colder than usual, though every candle flickered steady. The table had been set carefully, silver polished, napkins folded in shapes too precise for comfort. My sister poured coffee into matching cups, the steam curling upward like it was trying to escape the room before words ruined the air. Across from me sat my daughter, her face calm, almost serene, the same serenity she'd worn the night she sold my ring. Around her, the rest of them, brother, sister, niece, cousin, each pretending this was dinner, not trial. "We just want closure," someone said. The word landed heavy, hollow. Closure wasn't peace, it was paperwork. Then my niece, the lawyer, the arbiter in their little drama, unfolded a letter. Her tone was professional, detached, the same voice she probably used in court. "This is from Emily's counsel," she began, eyes avoiding mine. "It alleges that emotional neglect created distress significant enough to warrant mediation." "Neglect?" I whispered. "You mean boundaries." She cleared her throat, continuing. "The letter suggests that reconciliation could occur under structured terms, pending your acknowledgement." I cut her off. "Acknowledgement of what? Of lies signed on legal paper?" No one met my eyes. My daughter sat still, hands folded neatly on her lap, as though she'd been coached not to speak. The sound of the spoon tapping her cup echoed, metallic, rehearsed. My pulse matched its rhythm. I reached for my own cup. The coffee was cold now, bitter to the tongue. I swallowed it anyway, let the taste burn down to memory. "Truth doesn't need negotiation," I said, quietly but clear enough for every ear at that table. "Sometimes," my sister murmured, "truth does need witnesses." Her words made my hands shake. Witnesses? Against whom? Against me? Against the woman who had given up everything to raise a child who now sat, silent, across from her like an adversary in court? The arbiter shifted uncomfortably. "If we can all just stay calm, maybe mediation." "No." My voice cracked the air. "You don't mediate morality. You don't take love and turn it into evidence." For a moment, no one moved. Even the candlelight seemed to freeze. Then my brother leaned forward, elbows pressing into the table. "She's not your enemy," he said. "She's hurting too." "Hurting?" I repeated, laughter spilling out like something broken. "She forged my name, drained my account, humiliated me in public. And you call that hurt?" "She's your daughter," he said, almost pleading. "She was," I answered, "before she turned family into witnesses." The arbiter sighed, sliding another sheet of paper toward me. "At least look at the contract. It's only a draft." I didn't want to, but my eyes betrayed me. The words blurred at first, the legal phrasing cold and sharp. Terms of acknowledgement, reconciliation, subject to supervised mediation, potential restitution, pending emotional harm. Every sentence felt like a knife disguised as grammar. I looked up. "So this is what family means now. Signatures instead of forgiveness." "It's not like that," my sister said softly. "Then what is it like?" My voice trembled, half fury, half grief. Because from where I sit, it looks like betrayal with etiquette. My niece hesitated. You don't have to sign tonight. I won't sign ever. The silence afterward was complete. Only the faint ticking of the clock filled the gap between us. Outside, wind pressed against the windows, restless and cold. I pushed the contract back across the table. My fingertips left faint marks where tears had already dampened the ink. I could taste metal now, bitter as the coffee I'd forced down minutes ago. Every breath felt heavier. My daughter stood finally, but not to come closer. You've made your choice, she said. So have you, I replied. She turned and walked out, the sound of her heels fading down the hallway like a verdict being carried out. No one followed her. They just sat there, each pretending this was about healing, not inheritance of blame. The arbiter gathered the papers into a neat stack, aligning the corners with surgical precision. I'll inform counsel of your position, she said. Her tone was almost kind. Almost. I nodded. There was nothing else to say. The candles flickered again, and for a second the whole table seemed to breathe, exhaling pity, shame, distance. When they finally left, I sat alone, staring at the cup she'd touched, the rim faintly smudged. I thought of every meal we'd shared, every argument that began in love and ended in silence. Now, even silence felt owned by someone else. The contract still lay there, wet at the edges where my tears had blurred the ink. I reached for it, folded it once, then again, until it was small enough to fit in my palm. Even blood demanded proof. Sirens sounded softer than her lies. They came just after dawn, when the world is still between dreaming and daylight. Red and blue lights pulsed through the curtains, staining the walls like guilt in motion. I thought it was an ambulance at first, until the sharp rap at the door. 3 knocks. Firm, official. The kind of sound that erases sleep and rewrites it with fear. Police department, ma'am. Open the door. I pulled on my robe, my hands clumsy. The chill of the floor crept up through my feet. Outside, engines idled low, steady as judgment. When I unlatched the lock, the door swung open with a groan that seemed too loud for morning. 2 officers stood there, flashlights in hand, though the sky was already gray. Behind them, a third waited near the patrol car. And just beyond him, her. Standing on the sidewalk, wrapped in a pale sweater, eyes red, trembling just enough to look believable. "Are you Margaret Harper?" the taller officer asked. "Yes. What's going on?" He exchanged a glance with his partner. "We received a report of a potential self-harm risk at this address." The words didn't make sense at first. They felt borrowed from someone else's life. "A what?" "An anonymous call came in," he said carefully. "We're required to check on your well-being." "I'm fine," I said. "Who would even—" But I didn't need to finish. My eyes had already found her face. My daughter looked away quickly, pressing a tissue to her lips. A neighbor's window opened across the street. Curtains shifted, witnesses gathered like flies. "I'm fine," I repeated, louder this time. The shorter officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, we'll just take a quick look inside, all right? Standard protocol." "You think I'm hiding a crime in my own home?" I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking. He sighed. "It's not about that. We just need to ensure you're safe." Safe. The word landed like mockery. Still, I stepped aside. They entered, their boots leaving damp marks on the tile. Flashlights swept across the living room, over framed photographs and folded laundry, over the letter I hadn't mailed yet. Each beam felt like a blade of light cutting into my privacy. I caught sight of the clock. 6:32 a.m. Exactly. The moment humiliation became part of my official record. "Kitchen's clear," one of them called. "Bedroom next." I followed as they opened doors I'd closed for peace. The beam from a flashlight lingered on the mirror by my bed, my reflection ghost-like and hollow. I wanted to tell them the only thing broken here was trust, but procedure didn't care for poetry. When they finished, the taller one holstered his light and gave me a sympathetic look. "You seem fine, ma'am. I'm sorry you had to go through this." "Then maybe write that down," I said sharply. "In your report." He paused. "We'll note it." Outside, she was still there, arms folded now, pretending concern had turned into relief. "Mom, I was scared," she said, voice cracking perfectly on cue. "You haven't been answering my messages." "I blocked your number," I said quietly. "Boundaries aren't emergencies." Her eyes filled again, that practiced shimmer. "I just wanted to help." "You wanted to watch," I said. "There's a difference." One of the officers shifted awkwardly. "Let's keep it calm, all right?" Calm. That word again, always used when truth made people uncomfortable. The protector, Sergeant Daniel, arrived a few minutes later. He'd been the one helping me file the earlier complaint. His expression was heavy with the kind of understanding that never comes with comfort. "Someone's testing your limits," he murmured under his breath. "Don't give them the reaction they're hoping for." "I don't have any left," I said. He gave a small nod. "I'll make sure this is logged properly. Every name, every timestamp." That was all I needed. Documentation. Proof that my sanity had been inspected and stamped adequate by authority. As they left, I stood at the doorway, the morning finally breaking open. The first sunlight caught on their badges, turning metal to glare. Each reflection seared into my eyes, a gallery of power, detached and procedural. The engines started again. One by one, the vehicles pulled away. Even the sirens sounded apologetic this time. The street grew quiet, neighbors retreated, curtains fell, and life pretended to resume. I lingered in the doorway, the air still vibrating with what had just been taken: privacy, dignity, control. My hands shook as I noted the badge numbers in my notebook. 419, 203, 1 or 12. 3 witnesses, unwilling accomplices to her performance. Inside, the living room looked untouched, but felt invaded. The lamplight flickered once and steadied, as if trying to reassert normalcy. But normal had left hours ago, carried away in the reflection of a badge. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the faint smell of ozone and metal from the flashlights. It clung to the walls like residue. The institution that should have protected had become her theater, and I was the act. The sunlight stretched across the floor, tracing the outline of the door they'd entered through. The hinges still trembled faintly, metal remembering intrusion. The lights left shadows I can't clean. Silence became my only ally. The house was still, almost reverent, as if it understood the weight of the morning. Papers lay across the dining table like wounded soldiers, creased, annotated, stapled together with desperation and resolve. Each one carried a fragment of what they'd taken from me. Emails rewritten, forms forged, signatures cloned. I'd spent 2 weeks collecting it all, piece by piece, until truth had a body again. Outside, wind pressed against the windows, restless but restrained. The kind that whispers change before you can name it. I opened the binder. The sound of plastic rings snapping apart broke the quiet like a confession. Inside, the pages glowed faintly under the lamp's soft light, each one tagged and labeled. Letters, receipts, the incident report, even the copy of the police welfare check, all now ordered, numbered, real. My handwriting crawled through the margins, small notes in black ink. Timeline verified. Signature mismatch. Audio proof confirmed. The binder wasn't heavy, but it carried everything that mattered. Survival in printed form. I picked up the small USB drive from the table, its label read in faded ink. Truth, row 1. My fingers ran along its edges, smooth and cold. The texture grounded me. This little thing contained hours of recordings, voice messages, call logs, all the evidence of a mother framed by her own child. I stared at it for a long time before whispering, "You'll speak louder than I ever could." The phone buzzed. A message from the gatekeeper clerk. Hearing confirmed for tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bring original documents. Tomorrow. The word hit hard. I exhaled, steady but long. Fear had lived here for too many months. Now it had to make room for something else. Conviction. I called Daniel, the protector sergeant who'd become my unexpected ally. He answered on the second ring. "You ready for this?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. "They'll try to rattle you," he warned. "Don't let them turn confidence into aggression. Keep it clean, keep it factual." "I've been clean this whole time," I said quietly. "It's the dirt around me that's loud." He paused. "That's why it's time. Truth only scares those who built comfort on lies." His words lingered even after the call ended. I sat there in the half-light, binder open, USB between my palms. For the first time in months, I felt still, not numb, not defeated, just still, like a tide before it breaks. I remembered her face at the last family meeting, the cool defiance, the rehearsed fragility, how everyone else had nodded, too eager to believe the story that made them comfortable. Tomorrow, that story would fracture under daylight. My pen rolled toward me and stopped against the edge of the table. The ink inside shimmered faintly under the lamp. I picked it up and wrote one last note on the final page. Cross-examine everything. Then I closed the binder and pressed it shut, sealing months of chaos into order. The quiet around me deepened, but it no longer felt oppressive. It was waiting. A pause before consequence. When I looked out the window, the leaves had started to fall, slow spirals of amber and gold, each landing with a whisper. The season was shifting, trading heat for clarity. I opened the window just enough for the air to move through the room. The faint scent of dry leaves mixed with the smell of ink and paper. Change had a scent, and I could finally breathe it. The clock on the mantel read 7:18 p.m., 12 hours until the hearing. 12 hours until I faced them with evidence, not emotion. My silence, once used as their weapon, would turn witness. I stacked the binder neatly beside the USB, aligning both like coordinates on a map. This was my defense, my resurrection. I wasn't fighting for reputation anymore. I was fighting for truth to exist in daylight. I ran my thumb along the binder's spine one last time. The plastic edges pressed gently into my skin, leaving faint marks, temporary but real. Proof of touch, of persistence, of having survived this far. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the glass. It sounded almost like applause, or maybe it was warning. Either way, it didn't matter. The stage was already built, and the script was no longer hers to write. I turned off the lamp. Darkness filled the room, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. Tomorrow, my silence ends. Every seat turned into a judgment. The courtroom felt smaller than it should have. Walls pressing in, light too bright, air too thin. Reporters filled the benches, their pens already moving before I spoke a single word. Cameras blinked red like watchful eyes. The hall was lined with mirrors disguised as screens, each reflecting fragments of faces I didn't trust. Emily sat across from me. Perfect posture, perfect dress, perfect grief, the kind that photographs well. Her lawyer whispered something, and she nodded. Once, like she'd rehearsed even that. When the judge entered, the murmurs collapsed into silence. The gavel struck wood, sharp and final. "County Court, Case 524B," the clerk announced. "Hearing on financial misconduct and custodial falsification." My throat tightened. Those words, clinical, cold, had replaced the truth. A daughter's betrayal dressed in procedure. The arbiter, my niece, sat near the front. She caught my eye briefly, a look between duty and regret. She was my ally today, but she'd warned me. Once this starts, there's no going back. I'd already gone too far to turn around. The judge looked up. "Proceed." Emily's lawyer rose first. "Your Honor, my client only sought to protect her mother's well-being. The funds in question were accessed under belief of consent." "Belief?" I interrupted. My voice echoed louder than I expected. "Belief isn't law." The courtroom shifted.
A few heads turned. One reporter's pen paused mid-sentence. He frowned. My client had access to the shared account, and there was no shared account, I said. That form was falsified. My signature was copied. Exhibit C will show that. The arbiter stood and passed a sealed folder to the clerk. Marked and submitted, she said. I watched as the clerk opened it, every page a scar printed in black ink. I'd numbered them carefully. I'd touched each one the night before, the texture of truth gritty under my fingertips. The judge adjusted his glasses. Exhibit C, unauthorized withdrawal, $9,200, time-stamped March 5th, he read aloud. Account name, Margaret Harper. Secondary access, Emily Harper. Whispers rippled across the benches. Cameras clicked in bursts like shattering glass. Emily shifted in her seat. The performance cracked just slightly. I did it for her, she said suddenly, voice trembling. She wasn't well. She was unstable. I was trying to protect what's left of our family. Her tears came on cue. The audience leaned in. The first shame came from the back row, then another. Monster! Someone whispered, Mother, like a question, like a curse. I turned toward them. Yes, I said quietly. Mother, the word she used when she needed something and forgot when she didn't. The judge's gavel struck again. Order! But order was already gone. Emotion had replaced it. I breathed slowly, anchoring myself in the light spilling from the skylight above. It glared across the table between us, cutting the room in two. For a moment, it looked almost holy, truth descending like punishment. I have lived in silence long enough, I said. Today, I speak not to wound, but to restore what's been broken. My words felt strange, too steady for the storm inside. Emily looked at me then, her eyes wet but defiant. You think this makes you righteous? No, I said. It makes me free. The arbiter interjected softly. Your Honor, please note that the financial records align with the earlier incident report, ID 419A. The timestamp corroborates unauthorized access within the same 24-hour window as the police welfare check. The judge nodded slowly, pen tapping the paper. Understood. Silence stretched. Even the camera shutters stopped clicking. The air thickened.
With something like comprehension, fragile but forming. For months I had been the ghost of accusation, the quiet name on everyone's lips. Now the truth stood printed, time-stamped, undeniable. The stakes were no longer just legal. They were moral, human, irrevocable. I glanced toward the gallery. The crowd's expressions had shifted. Not sympathy, not outrage, but something harder to define. Recognition. The collective understanding that lies once exposed can't return to their shadows. The judge leaned back. We will reconvene after a short recess. The evidence will be reviewed. The gavel came down once more, not as punishment, but punctuation. As everyone rose, the room pulsed with whispers again, softer this time, less sure of who deserved pity. The arbiter approached me quietly. You did well, she said, but it's only the beginning. I nodded. My voice had been steady, my proof clean. That was all I'd promised myself. When the cameras dimmed, their red lights blinking off one by one, the weight of the moment finally hit me. For once, the silence wasn't fear. It was respect. The room went quiet for once. Truth, when spoken, can wound louder than lies. The courtroom had changed overnight. Yesterday, it was noise and spectacle. Today, it felt surgical, cold, focused, and stripped of illusion. Every breath echoed off the marble walls. Every camera waited like a hunter. The smell of old paper and coffee hung in the air, dense as expectation. The IT witness adjusted his glasses, standing beside a glowing screen. Lines of data scrolled like veins of electricity, evidence alive and breathing. He spoke in a calm, precise tone that cut sharper than any lawyer's rhetoric. This is the original metadata log from the account withdrawal on March 5th. The access signature was replicated, not recorded. The timestamp mismatch is clear. 2 seconds of delay in packet response. That's human alteration, not system drift. The judge leaned forward. You're certain? 100%, Your Honor. The forgery was executed from a secondary device registered to the defendant's personal email. A sound rippled through the audience, a soft intake of breath, disbelief rustling like fabric. Emily's lawyer froze. She looked smaller now, hands clasped tightly, nails biting into her palms. The performance was over, and truth had entered the room. She copied my authorization, I said quietly. Didn't she? The witness nodded. Yes, the data confirms it. Emily's voice trembled, barely audible. I just wanted her to notice me. The words landed like confession and plea at once. The sound of it, thin, cracking, filled every corner of that chamber. For months, I'd imagined this moment as triumphant, but standing there, watching her crumble under the weight of her own invention, I didn't feel victorious. I felt old. Older than truth. Older than forgiveness. The judge's gavel struck once, the echo deep and deliberate. Order in the court. My eyes drifted to the screen again. Each line of code was a memory rewritten, tiny electric lies stacked in rows. The noise of it still rang in my ears, the hum of fluorescent lights, the soft clicking of keys, the metallic scrape of consequence. Sound became my anchor, the courtroom a resonant chamber where deceit met its own echo. Your Honor, the arbiter said, stepping forward, for the record, this confirms no mental instability on the complainant's part. The narrative of endangerment was manufactured. Duly noted, the judge replied. Reporters scribbled furiously, the pens moving faster than conscience. I heard whispers. Forged evidence. Digital confession. Family tragedy. The headlines were already being born before justice was even declared. Emily looked at me then, not as a daughter, not as a victim or a liar, just a person stripped of story. You win, she whispered. There's no winning here, I said. Only ending. Her lips trembled. I didn't mean for it to go this far. But it did, I answered, and that's the part we live with. The witness disconnected the projection. The light from the screen faded, leaving a faint afterglow on the wall, a ghost of proof. The silence that followed felt thick enough to touch. For once, no one moved. Even the judge's pen paused midair. The arbiter broke it softly. Your Honor, we request that all charges of misconduct against my client be dismissed and that restitution proceedings commence. Granted, the judge said after a beat. The court recognizes clear evidence of fabrication and exonerates the complainant of all false claims. The gavel came down again. A single merciful sound. Applause wasn't allowed, but a murmur of relief swept through the benches, a shift in the air like a collective exhale. The cameras blinked again, recording the moment where fiction finally surrendered to fact. I looked at Emily one last time. She stared straight ahead, jaw trembling, tears forming but unshed. The silence between us felt like a verdict of its own, clean, irreversible, almost holy in its finality. Justice didn't restore youth, or lost years, or love corroded by manipulation. But it gave back truth, bare, unadorned, enough to breathe again. The reporters began to pack up, murmuring over one another. The witness collected his files, nodding respectfully before leaving. The arbiter placed a hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm. It's done, she said. I didn't respond. I just listened. To the creak of wooden benches, the shuffle of departing feet, the hum of light overhead slowly dimming. Each sound felt earned. When I turned to leave, I caught Emily's reflection in the dark glass of the courtroom door. Her mouth moved, but no words came. Her silence, for the first time, told the truth. Justice spoke in measured tones. The courtroom air was still, almost reverent, as the judge began to read. The gavel rested between his hands, heavy with finality. Every word he spoke seemed to fall slower than time itself, like the truth needed room to land after all the noise. The court finds the complainant not guilty of misconduct. All charges of instability and endangerment are dismissed. Restitution in the amount of $9,200 is hereby ordered to the plaintiff. This court recognizes the evidence as verified and the forgery as deliberate. Each syllable cut clean through the tension that had strangled this room for months. The arbiter lowered her head, a quiet exhale escaping her. Relief, exhaustion, maybe both. Reporters scribbled, the rustle of paper filling the silence like rainfall after drought. My hands trembled slightly on the wooden rail before me. For so long, they'd been empty, reaching, defending, proving. Now they held something invisible but certain. Justice had a texture, after all. It felt like air finally moving freely in your lungs. Cameras flashed in bursts of light. I used to flinch when they did. Today, I didn't. The brightness didn't blind. It revealed. I saw faces in that crowd that had once turned away from me, now watching with something close to remorse. A few even clapped softly, hesitant but real. Emily sat in the second row, smaller than I remembered. The armor of her defiance was gone. She looked pale, almost translucent in the light that pooled across her lap. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. Neither did I. There were no words left worth trading. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't answer. The pages in front of her stayed untouched. For the first time, she seemed to understand what truth costs and who pays when it's late. The judge tapped the gavel once, a soft echo that marked not just an ending, but the collapse of everything false. Court adjourned. That sound stayed in the air longer than any applause could. Outside, the world was waiting. Reporters pressed forward, microphones like spears, but their words were different now. Vindicated. Mother exonerated. Forged evidence exposed. The same press that once printed my disgrace now printed my resurrection. One headline flashed on a phone screen held toward me. Mother vindicated after forgery trial. The letters looked unreal, but the rhythm of them felt earned. I stepped into the daylight. The wind carried voices, some curious, some kind. A woman touched my shoulder and whispered, "We believed you." Her tone was soft, uncertain, but it reached me. Every doubt had been loud. This faith was quiet, yet heavier in meaning. Across the steps, the arbiter joined me. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied. "The truth did." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes they're the same thing." We walked past the crowd together, flashes trailing us like stars too. Close. The courthouse doors closed behind with a hollow thud. One chapter sealed, another waiting. I caught sight of the newspaper vendor at the corner, holding up the early edition. My face was there, grainy but clear. Beneath it, the headline, "Cleared of all charges." For once, I didn't look away from my own name. The arbiter folded the paper and handed it to me. "Frame it," she said. "No," I murmured, watching the light flicker across its surface. "I'll remember it without the frame." Cars passed, horns faint in the distance. Somewhere, a clock struck noon, a reminder that life doesn't pause for verdicts. The world moves forward, indifferent yet waiting for the next story. I turned back once, just enough to see Emily standing at the courthouse doors. Reporters ignored her now. The same flashes that once chased me now fell on her, but they no longer glorified. They exposed. She raised a hand, maybe to wave, maybe to shield her face. I couldn't tell. The crowd behind me clapped again. A strange, broken rhythm. Not celebration, recognition. The same sound that once condemned me now carried another tone entirely. Applause turned from weapon to witness. Freedom sounds quieter than expected. The house no longer echoed with argument or guilt. Each step I took down the hallway sounded softer, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. The furniture was gone, the air lighter, even the scent of old perfume fading into neutrality.
The window by the stairwell stood open, curtains lifting gently like they were learning how to breathe again. I'd boxed up what mattered: letters, records, 2 framed photographs, and left everything else for the donation truck. There's a strange mercy in emptiness. It doesn't accuse, it doesn't defend. It just lets you start over. My therapist, whom I now called simply the protector, said closure isn't emotional, it's administrative. You sign, you file, you move on, she told me during our last session. Her words stayed with me as I sorted the final documents stacked on the counter, a therapy note dated June 10th, and the court's stamped decree beside it. 2 pages that closed years of chaos. She had written, "Healing requires cold air and warm honesty." Maybe that was why I kept the windows open, even when the draft crept in. The coolness on my skin made the silence bearable. It reminded me that peace doesn't always feel gentle. It can sting before it soothes. Outside, the yard looked smaller. The chair I'd once sat in every evening now leaned against the fence, its paint peeling, the shape of memory still carved into its seat. I left it there on purpose, a reminder that some things should remain behind to witness your leaving. I walked room to room, running my fingers along bare walls, dust catching on my skin. "This is it," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was talking to. Maybe the ghosts that used to fill this place with noise. Maybe myself. The living room was last. That was where it had all started. The confrontation, the confession, the unraveling. I paused by the window, watching the light drift in across the floor. It moved like forgiveness, slow, hesitant, but steady. "Do you miss her?" the protector had asked me once. "No," I'd answered too quickly. Then softer, "I miss who she pretended to be." That truth still hurt more than the lies ever did. I found another folded note tucked inside an empty drawer, her handwriting uneven. "I never meant to destroy you. I just wanted to be seen." I didn't cry. I'd already spent the tears months ago. I set the note on the counter beside the others and let the wind from the open window take it halfway off the edge. If it fell, it fell. I wouldn't pick it up again. By late afternoon, the sun had shifted, and the house had taken on that late-day stillness when the air holds more memory than sound. The temperature dropped slightly, a faint cool drifting through the open rooms. I stood there, eyes closed, and let it wash over me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of being watched, judged, or doubted. The space was mine now, not as a monument to survival, but as a quiet ledger balanced at last. I thought about how the protector had once said, "Peace isn't a document, it's a decision you make every morning." Maybe she was right. Maybe freedom wasn't supposed to roar or glow, it just had to breathe. The boxes were labeled, the keys on the counter. I took one last look around. No photographs, no shadows, no debts left unpaid. Just air and sunlight and the faint hum of something returning to balance. I forgave her absence, but not her act. That distinction mattered. It kept the truth clean. Forgiveness doesn't erase. It reorganizes. Outside, the wind pressed the curtain inward one last time before slipping out. I smiled at that small movement, the way life insists on entering again, even through the smallest gaps. I locked the door without ceremony. The metal was cool against my palm, grounding. As I stepped onto the porch, the quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was full, of endings accepted, of things I no longer needed to say. Peace arrived unsigned but valid. I planted lilies again, this time for myself. The soil felt different beneath my hands. Cool, forgiving, not like the hardened ground I'd left behind months ago. Morning light stretched across the garden, soft and uncertain, the kind of light that doesn't yet know if it belongs to a new day. Around me, voices murmured gently, familiar but not invasive. The community had returned, and so had I. The witness gardener approached with a quiet smile, holding out a small laminated card. "We kept your spot," he said. The card bore my name, printed clearly, without hesitation. That small kindness hit deeper than any applause could. It wasn't redemption.
It was recognition. I knelt in the dirt, pressing the spade into the ground. The sound of metal against earth was steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat rediscovered. The lilies were still delicate, their roots thin but determined. I'd chosen white ones this time, not for purity, but for truth, the color that remains after every shade fades. As I planted the first bulb, the scent rose, faint, clean, alive. It caught in the breeze, carrying itself across the rows of garden beds. Months ago, I couldn't bear the smell of flowers. It reminded me of memorials, of apologies laid too late. But now, it was just the smell of life insisting on beginning again. The gardener watched for a while before speaking. "You've got a steadier hand than last year." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe the ground finally trusts me back." He chuckled softly, wiping his palms on his apron. "It does that, when it knows you've learned to listen." We worked in companionable silence. The others nearby chatted about seed deliveries and weather, the easy language of people who've stopped fighting their own stories. Every so often, someone would nod toward me, a small acknowledgement that once would have burned, but now felt warm. When the last bulb was set, I leaned back on my heels, looking at the patchwork of new soil. The sunlight had grown stronger, catching the edges of the garden's signboard. Community Renewal Project. My name was listed beneath it, again, not erased, not replaced, but restored. I pulled the membership card from my pocket and turned it over. On the back, in small print, it read, "Issued by the Renewal Committee, Entry 411B. Proof that I existed not as scandal, but as contribution, a simple record of belonging." The scent of lilies drifted again, more vivid now, the air sweetened by their bloom. It filled my chest, not as memory, but as evidence, something living where pain had once rooted deep. I let my hands rest on the soil, cool and damp, pulse steady beneath my fingers. Growth makes no promises, but it always returns when tended. The gardener stood beside me, looking over the beds. "They'll be in full bloom by spring," he said. "I can wait," I replied. "I'm not in a hurry anymore." He nodded once, satisfied. "Then they'll last." A small group of neighbors passed by, their smiles unguarded this time. One of them called out, "Good to see you back." The words floated lightly, unburdened by pity. I raised a hand in return, simple, unceremonious. Sometimes survival doesn't need an audience, just witness. I stayed long after the others had gone, sitting on the edge of the garden plot. The afternoon air cooled, and the shadows stretched over the soil in gentle lines. For years, I'd carried silence like punishment. Now it felt like peace. I brushed the dirt from my palms, leaving faint streaks of brown against the skin. It didn't look like failure anymore. It looked like proof of work done. The garden would outlive gossip, rumor, judgment. That was enough. As I rose, a breeze moved through the lilies, their stems swaying like a quiet chorus. The scent followed me down the path, steady and forgiving. The same flowers, but a different woman. This time I raised my glass to silence. The hall shimmered with evening light, the same golden wash that once blurred my vision years ago. Back then, it felt like judgment. Tonight, it felt like grace. The chairs were aligned in neat rows, ribbons tied to their backs, a faint scent of lilies. Someone else's celebration now. I wasn't the center anymore, and that was its own kind of peace. A young mother stood at the edge of the stage, trembling as her daughter's name was called. Her hands shook just slightly, pride spilling through the cracks of fear. I knew that look too well, the fragile balance between pride and pain. When the applause erupted, she flinched before smiling. I recognized the gesture. It was the same one I'd worn when everything inside me had been breaking. They clapped, while my heart split open. I remembered that moment with painful clarity. The same hall, the same lights, the same applause that had once sounded like accusation. Tonight, the rhythm was identical, but the meaning had changed. They clapped while my heart stood whole. The arbiter found me in the crowd and offered a quiet nod. "You made it back," she said softly. "I didn't leave," I replied. "I just had to rebuild the room inside me first." She smiled, understanding. We both knew this wasn't about vindication anymore. It was about presence, staying. I looked down at the invitation card still folded in my hand. Community Achievement Gala. Entry 524C. Printed proof that I belonged here again, not as the accused or the redeemed, but simply as someone who endured. The paper caught the light, that same stubborn glimmer tracing the edges of its embossed letters. Proof doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just exists quietly. The waiter passed by with a tray of glasses, each one catching the overhead light. I took one, holding it steady. The reflection danced along the rim, refracting into a faint halo. I remembered the first time I'd stood here, when the sound of clinking glasses had drowned out my voice. Now, the silence between each clink was mine to fill. The arbiter lifted her glass first. "To beginnings," she said. "To endurance," I added, the words steady, certain. We drank, and for a brief moment, the air shifted. The applause from the stage faded into background, replaced by the soft hum of conversation and laughter. The music swelled, light and unburdened. I moved toward the stage as the young graduate received her award. Cameras flashed. Flashes that once terrified me now just looked like sparks in motion, harmless and fleeting. She caught my gaze from across the crowd, and for a heartbeat, I saw myself reflected in her. The fear, the hope, the fight for truth. I clapped for her loudly. The sound wasn't penance, it was participation. Later, when the hall began to empty, I stayed behind, standing near the stage where the last streamers hung loose. The light had softened, the glass in my hand now half filled, the reflection dimmer but gentler. I didn't need the noise anymore to feel seen. I'd learned that silence doesn't mean absence. It can mean peace. Outside, the night had settled like a final page turned. The air carried the faint echo of celebration, voices fading into distance. I lingered at the doorway, looking back one last time. The hall glowed faintly under the chandeliers, the same way it did years ago. But everything inside me had changed. Someone brushed past and whispered, "Good to see you here again." "Good to be," I said, meaning every word. I raised my glass once more, not to memory, not to justice, not to loss, but to the quiet triumph of staying alive long enough to see the light return. They clapped, and I stayed standing.